Good morning. Can you hear me? I don't know how to do these microphones. I'm Rachel Mangan, and I'm proof that you don't have to be a Carrie to be a teacher here. So I am excited to be here, and just a quick introduction of myself. There'll be a picture up here in a second, but I'm a wife and a mom, and this is my husband, David, and we will be married 30 years next month. And then my oldest son, Andrew, we have 3 grown sons, Andrew, Luke, and Matthew, and they're all married. So now I have a family with 6 kids. So there's Andrew and Susie. Andrew is a second-year resident in ENT here at UAMS, so if you have tubes in the years to come, you may run into him. And Susie's an engineer here in Little Rock, and they're going to have a baby. So I get to be a grandmother, and they are going to be great parents. And then Luke and Grace on the left, they live in Nashville, Tennessee. He works for a publishing company and does a lot of writing, and Grace is an attorney. And then in the middle is the baby, Matthew and Corey, and Matthew is a third-year med student at UAMS, and Corey's a third-year pharmacy student. So we have a fun, full, busy life. And I also work. I'm a working mom. Like I said, my nest is empty, so that doesn't really matter now. But I do work full-time for a pharmaceutical company with oncologists that have leukemia patients. So that's a little bit about me, but I'm excited to be here with you all. It wasn't that long ago. It seems like that I was sitting in those chairs, but it actually was probably longer than I think. So today we're going to take a bit of a turn in the curriculum. You've been talking about the big picture concepts, and today we're going to move a little bit more into the nuts and bolts and the practical side of discipline. So in the first week, I think you set the foundation for why you discipline, why we discipline. Carrie talked about how our goal is to prepare our kids and point them to a life with Jesus. And when we mess up, it's our chance to apologize to our kids and remind ourselves and our children that we need Jesus, that we can't do this on our own. We desperately, desperately want you to know that discipline and love go together, and that discipline is not punishment, but it's actually one of the greatest gifts you can give your kids, and it's one of the best ways that you can show that you love them. And then Carrie Helmick talked about pay me now or pay me later, and the fact that if you put the work in now, even though it's painful, kind of like setting Drew's broken arm, it's for their good. And it does pay off in the long run. So you'll hear us saying over and over throughout the weeks that paying now in this stage that you're in is so hard. It takes a lot, and we know that. But waiting and paying later will actually cost a lot more. The stakes will be higher, and it'll be a lot harder in the long run. Then last week, Carrie talked about what it is that's making parenting so hard. If you remember she talked about the Maze Runner, the movie. We think we've got it down. Okay, we've got this stage, we've got this, and then it all changes. So that's really what it is like. And that is what makes parenting so challenging. It is always changing. And so she talked about how parenting, is different with every kid, every situation, every day. She talked about how we take all of those factors into account and then take into account our kids' needs, how they're different, and honoring them and honoring God in seeing our kids and how they're uniquely designed. So we're going to keep all those big concepts in mind as we move forward in our series. And today we're going to talk about the 3 levels of discipline: teach, train, and correct. Okay? So we're going to talk about what that means. We're going to spend most of our time today talking about teaching and training, because the next 2 weeks you'll be spending time talking about correction. So think for a minute. Have you ever been in a situation where someone came down on you or corrected you, or you got in trouble for something you really didn't even know how to do and nobody had taught you? Think about how that felt. Probably unfair. Maybe you got a little defensive, even embarrassed. Think about your kids in that situation. When we correct our kids without teaching or training them in what to do, those same feelings pop up for them. And sometimes they don't exactly know how to communicate that, but they're feeling like it's unfair. There's frustration. And over time, resentment can build. So when we think of discipline, most of us immediately think of correction. At least I did. But I want you to kind of shift your mindset when you hear the word discipline, because discipline starts actually way before you ever start correcting. And without going into a full lesson in Greek and Latin, I do think it's important to know, and you probably can see this very clearly, that the root of the word discipline is disciple. And the origin of the word disciple is actually a word that means learner. So when you think of discipling our kids, I want us first to think of them as our students, our learners, our own little apprentices, and it's our job to train, disciple them. So before we begin to correct them, okay? So they're our little learners, our little disciple. We're going to disciple them before we ever start correcting them. Because before we can hold them accountable for an action or even a behavior or an attitude, we have to make sure we've taught them and that they understand what's expected. And sometimes we forget how much we have to actually teach our kids. We just assume they know things because we know them, and they're just part of our everyday life. It's second nature. We can't assume anything when it comes to what we need to teach them. Andrew and Luke, my first two, they were almost 15 months apart. And so my oldest at this time he's getting close to 2. Luke was about getting close to, he was around 6 months, I think. And we were working on sharing with Andrew, okay? Like, you have a brother now. This is what it means to share. You're going to not have all your toys. You're going to share. What does that look like? How does that play out? So I'm in the back of the house. It's quiet, which is always a problem. So I go to the den, and there's Luke in his little bouncy seat, and there's Andrew shoving hot tamale candies into his mouth. Red all over. And of course, I'm like, no, I start correcting. You cannot do that. And he just looks at me and I said, what were you doing? And he looked at me with the most innocent face and goes, I'm sharing. So that was a very clear picture to me that I can't take for granted that he knows that a 6-month-old cannot have candy. Like, those are things we think they would know. They don't. And why the 2-year-old was into my hot tamales, I don't know, and that's a story for another day. But so we're going to talk about those 3 primary ways that we teach our children. There's plenty more, but these are kind of the ones we're going to focus on. But before I get started, I want you to hear me say just very loud and clear, like, I am not a perfect parent. I didn't do things perfect. I'd love to do do-overs. I'm so far from perfect. But I am coming here to tell you that there's no formula to ensure that your kids turn out perfect. Just because you do these steps that I'm going to share with you does not mean they're going to be perfect. There is no perfect child. That's why we need Jesus. And that's why we depend on him. So I come to you as a mom that had to depend on God every single day, and I still do. My boys are grown. They're married. Guess what? I still make mistakes. And thankful for the grace of God, because there is so much grace in our parenting. And just know that God has that grace on you and our kids. So let's not have the goal of being perfect parents, raising perfect kids. Let's depend on God for the grace to raise our kids to know him despite what we get right or what mistakes we make along the way, because he uses it all. So how do we go about teaching and training our kids? So we're going to talk about 3 different ways. As I said, we can do this by, one is modeling. You cannot underestimate how much your kids are picking up just by watching you. Depending on the day, this can be a good thing, or it can be a not so good thing. They're going to imitate our actions, our attitudes, and our behaviors, and it's up to us to show them what that appropriate behavior looks like. They will follow your example way more than they're going to follow your words and what you tell them. In 1 Corinthians 11:1 says, be imitators of me as I follow Christ. So it will be important that you continually challenge yourself. Am I living the life I want my kids to emulate and imitate? And this applies to our actions, our behaviors, but just as important as our attitudes. Think about the way you and your spouse talk to each other. So Is that the way you want your child interacting with others? Hopefully it is. And if you don't think they don't pick up on it or understand at a very young age, stand outside their door sometime while they're playing Barbies or Rescue Heroes or dolls, whatever they play with nowadays, and listen to the conversations those two little toys have at each other. You'll hear your own words, your own tone of voice, and attitude. If you haven't, I've got tons of stories about that. And what about the way you handle frustrating situations? I was convicted of this years ago when we were at Sonic. My boys were probably 3, 5, and 6, I think. And we were there, and it was taking forever. And I was frustrated, and I was voicing that frustration. I was pitching that red button. How much longer? We've been waiting. And of course, then I had to get home and I had to relay the whole story to my husband and blah, blah, blah. And not even really being cognizant of what was going on behind me. Do you know, to this day, and every time we passed that Sonic, which was every day, they're like, oh, that's when Mommy got so mad at that lady. And they'd wait as we were waiting forever. And, just hearing your own, you're like, wow. So that was very eye-opening. I mean, to this day, they're 27 on down. They still remember that. So, when you think about complaining, Philippians 2:14 says, do all things without grumbling or disputing. And other versions use the word complaining in place of grumbling. We cannot correct our children when they complain all the time if we're constantly grumbling and complaining throughout the day. And hear me, I'm speaking to myself, so just so you know. But we can't tell our kids to be kind with their words, live in an understanding way with others, and then constantly grumble when things aren't going the way we want or complain about the slow waitress. We have to constantly check ourselves. Are you complaining about even the little things throughout the day? And there are a lot, trust me, a lot of frustrations throughout the day. So how are we modeling those moments to our kids? If we're constantly grumbling about the situations or bad-mouthing other people or other situations, I promise you, there's not enough teaching to overcome the modeling of that. So what does that look like as they get older and they're in high school, elementary, middle school, high school? Anything they don't like and they're whining and complaining about it. We want to correct them and say, you don't need to have such a negative attitude. But could they just be mirroring what they've been modeled? So how do you teach your kids to live with people in an understanding way? It's through that modeling. And it's choosing to be patient and understanding when the Sonic order is slow, when the traffic is bad, when the receptionist is rude to us. How different would it have been if my response when that Sonic order took forever? I would have used that as a teaching moment and said, hey, this is frustrating, but they're really busy, and I bet they don't have enough workers. Let's be kind to the person delivering the food. She's probably really stressed out. Let's be different, and we're going to show her understanding and compassion. It would have turned out very different. And mamas, please hear me when I say those questions or scenarios, they're in no way a guilt trip or to point fingers or any of this sort, because I'm right there. But we do need to be aware of our attitudes and behaviors in those day-to-day lives. And don't forget to apologize to your kids and own your mistakes when you need to. When we apologize to our kids, it shows them what it looks like to take responsibility for our mistakes, and it builds trust, and it shows that we have to depend on Jesus and ask for forgiveness too. So we just have to ask ourselves, what do we want to model for our kids and be intentional about? And this takes a lot of time and a lot of self-control. Second way that we can teach our kids is by informal instruction. Basically, this is just what you do all day, every day. This is just teaching them as we go throughout the day. This is what speaks to in Deuteronomy 6:7. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. And this is where the majority of parenting happens. It's in the moment. Okay, so this requires a lot of time, and it requires a lot of talking to them. Think about the things you do throughout the day if you're home. Just about everything can be an informal teaching moment. Is it easier just to go pick up the clothes and get the dishes off the table and grab the toys and just do it yourself? Yes, but so much teaching happens just by talking to them as you go about the day. If a toddler is following you around while you're doing all this stuff, just talk to them. Just tell them why you're picking up the towels, where you're going to put the towels, who's going to use the towels, why do they need to be clean. It sounds ad nauseum, but that's how they learn, and that's how they learn to want to pick up the towels, you hope. But just talking to them is part of the day-to-day moments. And if you're taking a meal to a new mom or somebody that's sick, it's going to be easier to leave your 4-year-old at home with dad while you deliver the meal, go a lot quicker. But I encourage you, take the child with you, take them with you, let them carry part of it, talk to them on the way. Why are we taking a meal? Why are we doing this? Let them help you. Seems simple, but when you're trying to teach these broad concepts of show kindness, it's involving our kids that makes these concepts come to life. So the third way we can teach our children is by actual formal instruction. This is when we're intentional. When they're little, maybe it's setting aside time to teach them what it means to put your toys away, have the baskets, little things like that. Maybe you're taking time each day to role play a little bit of sharing, being intentional. When they're older, you may set aside time to teach them how to unload the dishwasher or washing machine, run some wash, or maybe change a tire. I never did learn that. Or mow the grass. But one of the things my husband wanted our boys to know was how to winterize the sprinkler system. I didn't know how to do that, and I still don't. But he was all about teaching. It was this catch-22 for them. So Dad would say, hey, do you know how to XYZ? Do you know how to change the sprinkler system? And they're like, they learned if they say yes, he'll say, great, go take care of that for me. If they say no, he'll say, great, come on, I'm going to teach you. So either way, they weren't getting out of it, but he was going to teach them, and that was a big part of their growing up. And one of the things I recommend is, maybe make a list of the things you want your kids to know before they leave the house, both in task and in character, and just start checking them off. And you can add them through the years. You're going to add different things, but it's good to say, oh, you know what? We haven't taught them yet how to open a checking account at the bank. Go teach them. So doing this requires knowing what they need and that you're available to them. And some of you may be working moms or have other responsibilities. I'm not talking about that. This is not if you're stay-at-home or if you're working. The truth is, we can be a stay-at-home mom, be with them all day, and if we aren't intentional, we can find that we are just as distracted and away from our kids as if we were away from the home. So I've been both a working mom and a stay-at-home mom. So what the point is, I'm talking to you when you're with them, be present. Be available, talk to them. Let them know you're there and that you see them and they matter. So once we've taught our kids, we're going to move more into the training phase. Now, training will always have an element of teaching involved. And in training, you're coming alongside your child as they practice what you're teaching them. They're developing that competency and good habits. You're providing support along the way and getting them back on course if need be, and you're being their biggest cheerleader. You think about athletics. So take swimming. I was a swimmer, so I'll use swimming. You go to a swim lesson. Teacher shows how to go from here to the other end of the pool. Then she's breaking it down for you. She's the arms, the legs, the kicking, the breathing. Does she then immediately say, okay, go swim to the other end of the pool? No, you're going to practice all those little steps. And then you're going to course correct. Say she sees you not kicking, she's going to correct that. And then you're going to keep going. You're going further and further. And before you know it, you're making it to the other end of the pool. So training your child and teaching them is a lot like that. You're teaching, you're training, you're correcting, you're going back and forth in all of these steps. So training is their chance to practice what you've taught them, and also their chance to do it imperfectly. Take cleaning their room. You feel like you've taught them how to put the toys away, they know what they're supposed to do, but you go in there and that room isn't really quite clean, so you give them a few pointers on what would actually constitute as clean, and you say, I'm going to leave, I'm going to let you practice that, and you come back, and if you still need my help, we'll do that. So it's just that back and forth. I remember when I went back to work full-time, my youngest was in kindergarten, and then they were second and third grade. And just kind of out of necessity, we taught them how to fold their own laundry. So, and where to put it, I had the drawers labeled. Do you think that was very pretty at first? How do you think those drawers looked? But I could have gone in and I could have just, yes, it would have been easier. I'm just going to do it. It'll be quicker and I'll just get it in there. But they were so proud of themselves. And each week it looked a little bit better, a little bit better. And before you know it, A, I didn't care as much, or B, it looked better. I'm not sure. But they are so much more capable than we give our kids credit for. And even at really young ages, I didn't really want to tell people I was having my kindergartner fold laundry. But you know what? He could, and he did it. So some practical tools to help with training. One might include charts. I was a fan of charts. They can be helpful during the training phase. If they can't read, put little pictures of a toothbrush, toothpaste, pictures of what goes in the backpack, before you load up to get in the car. Let them do those things. Doesn't mean you don't check it. You can check it, but let them have that responsibility. Make a flow chart, that they can follow. And these things are used to help establish a routine, things like getting them ready for bed. Well, when you say get ready for bed, they may not know what that means, but have a little chart and have the 3 things they've got to do, and that means getting ready for bed. It gives them that confidence in knowing what you're expecting, and it gives them that sense of accomplishment when they achieve that. And if they want to check it off, do a little chart where they get to do a check off or sticker or something like that. Our boys made their own lunches, and we had a little list of what they had to go in the lunch, and they had to have something healthy in there. They had to, it was a checkoff. Now, in time, then they didn't need the checkoff list. They just made their lunch. So when our kids were in late elementary, you got to get creative too, okay? So you don't have to just go buy the one chart or go on Amazon. You can make your own. We had a rotating chore chart. So when they got into grade school and middle school, then came the fussing of whose chore was easier, whose chore took longer, all the things. And so the grumbling. So we fixed it, and we did a rotating. So, they'd be on different, each week they'd rotate it. So just get creative, do what works for your kids. And as you train them to do these things, especially around the house, is it easier just to do it yourself? Probably. And is it going to look a lot nicer? For sure. But our job really is to train these little apprentices to be capable human beings when they leave. And that requires training and letting them do it and letting them practice and letting them mess up and try again. So that's my encouragement. A second way that you can, in training, you can use is rewards. So rewarding your child really is more than giving them something they want. It's about encouraging behaviors and habits that will serve them for life. When you recognize their effort and celebrate their progress, you motivate them to keep going until those actions become second nature. So in this training phase, rewarding effort really is just as important as rewarding the results. And when you recognize that hard work, even if they fall short, you're teaching them resilience and determination. So a few things to keep in mind when it comes to rewards. One would be that it doesn't turn into a bribe. Okay, so the best way to do this really is to set that reward ahead of time instead of reactively in the moment. So let's say you pull up to Target. A reward looks like, Johnny, we're going to practice what we've been teaching on self-control. And if you show me good self-control while we're shopping, we'll get to go get an ice cream cone on our way home. And you might remind him what that self-control looks like, no whining, kicking, tantrums, whatever. Versus in the middle of shopping, and Johnny's throwing a fit and throwing things and screaming, and you're like in desperation, Johnny, if you stop, we'll go get an ice cream after on our way home. That's a bribe. So you're trying to control that behavior in the moment. And just in terms, listen, we've all done it. I've done it. Just to our best of our ability, it really does work better if you set it up ahead of time and they accomplish that and they get rewarded. So, and also set them up to win, like maybe not go to Target when they're exhausted and hungry. The second thing is only if your child earns it, okay? So a reward really only works if they actually work for it. So really think through the reward before you put it out there. And this happened to me multiple times. If you tell your child you're taking to the pool with their friends, and let's say it's your girlfriends and their kids, as long as they stay in their room for all of the nap time, right? Until you come to get them. You need to be okay with not going to the pool, okay? and seeing your girlfriends if Johnny comes out of the room before he's supposed to. So too often, if the reward involves something the parents really want to do, we let things slide. Well, it was getting close to the end of nap time anyway. This simply teaches them that, they really don't have to fully obey. Like you probably, especially if it's something mommy wants, you're probably going to get to do it anyway. So they pick up on that. So I'd say the exception to this is when your child is working hard at something and they fall short of the goal, but you see how hard they're working. Let's say you said, we're going to learn how to ride our bike. By the end of the week, we're going to ride our bike without training wheels, and then here's the reward for that. You see them working hard every day and showing determination, and they're getting back up when they fall off. But it gets to Friday, and they just aren't quite ready to do it without the training wheels. Even though they've not fully met that goal, celebrate that with them and give them encouragement. It's so much more rewarding for them, and it teaches them so much more than coming down hard on them that they didn't get it done when they were working so hard. That little reward can be, you worked really hard, and I'm proud of that progress. And it's okay you're not quite there yet. Your effort is what counts here, and you're getting close every day. So this shows that they're not meeting the goal doesn't equal failure, okay? And that persistence and visible progress are worth rewarding. The third thing with rewards is that they're age appropriate. A 4-year-old's going to be really excited about a colorful sticker to put on his chart for cleaning up his toys or her toys. I'm sorry I use his all the time. I have all boys. So while a 10-year-old's probably not going to be real motivated by stickers, and just like a 4-year-old really isn't going to know what to do with a $10 bill, whereas a 10-year-old, a 4-year-old's not going to know what to do with a $10 bill. A 10-year-old who's trying to save for, a new baseball glove, or what does girls save for at 10? They're going to be motivated by that $10 bill. So just know that. I just had that situation with a grandmother one time. She gave me my 2-year-old, a $10 bill, and he's like, tears it up. So, know what motivates your child also. It's okay that the rewards look different. Some are going to like experiences. Some are going to like material things. Just know your kid, and it's okay that they're different. And the fifth thing is to be careful not to overuse rewards, okay? While they can be powerful tools for encouraging that positive behavior, it's also important not to overuse them and give them too frequently for every small action. They begin to expect a prize for even the basic tasks, like cleaning up or listening the first time. And this can lead to really a lack of that intrinsic motivation to do the right thing because it's the right thing, and as it becomes more focused on what do I get out of this. So as opposed to teaching that responsibility and self-control and pride in their accomplishments. You want those things to be their motivators in time. So it can reduce the effectiveness and create this environment of entitlement, like what do I get? So I want to say one thing about rewards is that as they get older, you get into these big things like allowance versus non-allowance, things like that. I'm going to be real honest. If you ask my kids, I probably owe them thousands of dollars in allowance. So just being honest about my failure in rewards, I was better with the stickers. So you just find what works. I just never had cash on me, so it was just a mess. So I figured they got rewarded that way, I hope. So another way, as we go on to train, is what I'd like to call role play and redo, okay? So role play is a great way to train and practice those social skills, like looking people in the eye or shaking someone's hand when you meet them. Just these things that also sound vague to them, like self-control and be kind. Like, what does that look like? Role play it. And the one I used all the time when my boys were growing up was role-playing scenarios. We did a lot of scenarios, especially ones like, how do we leave somewhere that we don't want to leave? So if you've ever tried to leave Chuck E. Cheese, and I don't even know if Chuck E. Cheese is even around anymore, but or the park or trampoline park or something like that, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But we would literally pull up into the parking lot and we would role play. When Mommy says, it's time to leave, what are you going to say? What are you going to do? And we had to do it a few times. And then we would walk through what the consequences were if it didn't go down that way. And you'll talk about that next week in correction. But what that role-playing did was it gave them the opportunity to practice and to hear what I'm going to say and practice what they're going to say and, just make it part of second nature. It didn't always work, but it was actually, they knew what was expected. They knew what they were supposed to do. And so role playing just helps them with that. And then when we did redos. As you're training, you allow them time to establish those good habits. It's not excusing the bad behavior, but giving them the opportunity to course correct themselves. If they're whining, you stop them and say, you know what? I'm going to give you a redo. I'm going to hear you ask that a different way. And we use that all the way through high school. I could probably use it today sometimes. We help our children learn more effectively when we see their mistakes in moments to teach resilience, emotional awareness, and responsibility. So when they're messing that up, just use that as an opportunity to train that out of them. We don't want our kids afraid of making a mistake, with us or with others or in life. So I read something the other day that I really liked when it comes to helping our kids. It's using the word yet. When your child's frustrated and they can't get something, add that word yet to them. It turns that failure into possibility. Like, I can't ride my bike. And you say, you can't yet, but it's coming. Just help them see that there's light, So, our job as we teach these kids is to encourage them to believe in themselves. Even in these early years, we're shaping that voice inside their head, okay? We want that voice to be loud and clear that they can do hard things. They're capable. We believe in them. It may not be perfect, and that's okay. We want that voice of self-doubt to be silenced. So there's a couple last thoughts that I'd like to leave you with. And that's just one, as I was thinking, it's like when we think about our goal and all this, and it's not to make our kids' life easier. And I would add to that, it's not to make our kids perfect. Rather, we want to help them see that they're capable. They're capable of hard things. And something hard at 2 is obviously different than something that's hard at 10. But it's hard nonetheless to them, and they're capable. And 2, to keep in mind, we're not just reforming their behavior. We're teaching them what it looks like to be like Jesus. So let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for these moms. Thank you so much for the time that you've given them to be here to learn what your plan is for our children. And God, we just ask that you would use any of these little tidbits that might be helpful as we teach and train our kids, and that we ultimately know that what we want is for them to be like you. We want them to show the grace to their kids. We want our kids to learn how to show grace to others when we make mistakes and when we fail at little things. That, Lord, you are constantly teaching and training our kids, and you're constantly teaching and training us. And for that, we're grateful. And we're especially grateful for your Son, Jesus Christ, who makes this path possible, that we can come here in grace. So thank you again for this time, and we just pray that you would honor their small group time and all of these little children and their families. We lift them up to you. In Jesus' name, amen.